the live stream. So, well, welcome everybody to the Thursday, July 22nd Town Board Workshop. We have 3 agenda items tonight. The first 2 should take literally about 2 minutes. And then the headliner tonight is Pete Baker from Barton and Judas and Art Patrone from Town of Webster to go over a discussion on the milestone event timeline for Phase 2 of the sewer plant. The first 2 items, real quickly, I guess, New York State consolidated funding application for grants this year, and I'm sure every year, has a deadline for submission on July 31st, which is, I think, 9 days away. And Matt Chatfield is spearheading the grant application process on Sandbar Park. And anybody that went to the open houses and saw the financial summary of Sandbar Park, right in there was we were hoping to apply for as much as $3 million plus. Actually, Matt just walked into the room. So one of the things we want to do, and it's really part of the application process, is just go on record to show that the town board is acknowledging and in support of this application, and also, I guess, authorizing the application and acknowledging that there may be on some of the components of that grant town matches. And then our own Director of Community Development, Josh Artuso, is going to be applying for on the town's behalf through the CFA of New York State for what looks to be about a $100,000 grant for related to updating the 2008 comprehensive plan. And same things that I just said about Sandbar, the town board needs to show in that application that we are authorizing it, supporting of it, and acknowledging that there may be some town grant matching money. So, any questions?
Second.
I think we got to do one at a time. Is that correct, Holly? So I'm going to make a motion that for the town board of Webster to authorize the submission of a grant application related to Sandbar Park through the New York State CFA, and that the board acknowledges that there may be a local match to that.
Second.
Supervisor Flaherty?
Aye.
Councilman Abbott?
Aye.
Councilman Dean?
Aye.
Councilman Cahill?
Aye.
Councilwoman Cataldi?
Aye.
Bill, before I read the next one, you think you got one more in you to chair a comprehensive, no? You done? You retiring? Okay.
I did
You know
2,
what?
that was enough.
Yeah, that is enough. To tell you the truth, that's one too many, actually. You special place in heaven. But I make a motion that the town board of Webster authorizes submission of grant application related to updating the 2008 comprehensive plan through the New York State CFA grant process, and that the town board acknowledges there may be a possible town match.
Second.
Supervisor Flaherty?
Aye.
Councilman Cahill?
Aye.
Councilman Dean?
Aye.
Councilman Abbott?
Aye.
Councilwoman Cataldi?
Aye.
Thank you, and that took, I told you, gang, 5:40 at the latest, you'll be up. It's 5:35, so without further ado, Art and Pete, you're on.
All right. So Supervisor had asked us to discuss the next few months and what the schedule may look like.
Oh, okay.
I think we all got one.
Yes.
Okay.
Print out and one by 17 too. Good.
So
Good.
to really explain the calendar, Pete actually took a lot of time putting together. Pete Baker is here to discuss the calendar he created for us, so we all stay on track, and we'll all learn what it means a little bit more in detail.
Okay, thanks, Art. Yeah, this is essentially the calendar. Last week I was here, starting the seeker process with the notice of intent. Resolution was passed and those letters went out. So essentially this is designed to kind of get the
Pete,
proposed.
Does it make more sense, Karen, to go to the podium for Pete?
He's got a mic.
I can get, because he's on where.
I was going to kind of point the boxes here for you if that helps, or whatever works. So
I got him.
He's mic'd.
I'm mic'd right now.
Okay, well, there you have it. All right. Sorry, Pete.
That's okay. So we started the process last week. I did update the schedule. I just X'd out where we are with respect to, so as you can see, we've gone through several steps. As far as the seeker process, this is intended to, when I say shovel readiness, there's two things we're looking for. Completion of seeker, basically developing a determination of significance, and then a bond resolution under Town Law Part 202B. Those two components are required historically required for the Water Improvement Infrastructure Act, the WIA grant that we've talked about. The town currently is working under a WIA grant for the current project. So that defines shovel readiness, and once those two are complete, once the program is announced, it hasn't been announced yet from EFC, once that's announced, you'll have basically the necessary components to apply for that grant. This is really just to kind of get it to that point. So it's essentially the walkthrough for seeker, and it's the walkthrough for the 202B town board resolution. Most of the stuff we're working on with Art, and then with Kim and Dolly as far as the submittals, and then anything in pink really would be towards the bottom here is more or less with bond counsel as far as authoring the bond resolutions. So it's color coded. Items are in blue are action items for B&L as far as when we need to submit paperwork to Kim and to Dolly, and then agenda items and paperwork. Right now, as of last Friday, the letters were submitted for the notice for the town to seek lead agency status. They were submitted. It's a 30-day waiting period, so we're going to be quiet for a couple weeks until those letters come back. Once those letters come back, we will start the determination of significance, the actual environmental review that goes along with seeker. The way we have it set up in seeker, technically seeker you can complete the part 2, which is essentially the environmental findings, and part 3 is the determination of significance, and then you can go through all those steps in one night. It's not uncommon. The way we've got this, we have time, so the way we've got the schedule set up is that essentially the part 2 and 3 would be submitted to the board. The board has the opportunity to review that. It's actually the formal submittal. On the next time we're in front of the board would be on August 19th. At that point in time, the letters come back from DEC, from EFC, from the other agencies indicating whether or not they object to the town being lead agency. Once the town establishes lead agency, we would have the part 2 and 3 EAF for the board's consideration at a board meeting. On the following day, we'd want to start that 202B process. Basically, that requires some advertisement of the Webster Herald, so we've kind of got those items that need to be submitted this would be on August 20th. On the following week, on the workshop, basically the workshop on the 26th, essentially that's our intent, is to formally present part 2 and 3. Ultimately, that's where the town, it's a workshop, so we can walk through what is in the EAFs. And then that's really gives the board the opportunity to kind of review and consider what the impacts for the project would be. The other part of that would be on that day, even though it's not the action, we've got the 202B public hearing. We need that to be advertised in order to meet the 10 to 20 day advance notice to have a formal public hearing to advance the bond resolution. And then on the September 2nd, basically we've got determination of significance would be the action that the board would hold. That in and of itself would complete seeker from the board's perspective. We need to follow up and post that determination to the environmental news bulletin. After that, we're really looking at now we're in the bond resolution stage of things. So there would be a public hearing on the following week of September 9th, in which case our proposal would be the public hearing would be opened up. It's a workshop, and then anybody that wants to comment can comment at that meeting, or certainly, and then leave the public hearing open for a week, and then the public hearing would be closed the following week on the 16th. And at that point in time, then discussions can be had regarding the bond resolution, and the bond resolution can be accepted. So really, again, this gets you through the seeker and the bond resolution through mid-September. Historically, the grant that the town would be pursuing for this project, it's typically announced around now. It was not announced last year, so we're kind of going off of history where it's more or less a mid-September submittal. The fact that we haven't heard anything, it's probably going to, my guess is it's going to be delayed. It's probably going to be October, simply because the EFC has not come up with any type of guidance on when this is coming out at this point. But it didn't come out last year. We're anticipating it would be announced this year.
Pete, all of these FRRs are included in the current amendment, current contract?
Yeah, so,
correct?
okay, good point. So right now, we are under contract with the town for the PER and the flex tech study, and then actually we have another part of that, which is seeker. So essentially, the work that we're doing right now is all under our current authorization for this work. So we pretty much, the PER is more or less wrapped up, more in the seeker phase of that. So that's pretty much takes us to the kind of the 202B resolution was really, we amended the PER to include a map and plan in that. So the map and plan part of that, which is required for 202B, that's been completed. Probably, I can send that to you. You probably would want to take a look at that
Yes,
and
I
make sure
will.
that you're
Now,
happy with that.
are all the responses for seeker going to be going to you
No,
or your
they
office?
should be going to Dolly. So
Okay.
that's how the letter was structured. So typically, you're going to get, SHPO, we submit that online. They don't take letters anymore. We'll get something from SHPO. DEC will, the State Historic and Parks, so basically, they will essentially, really no historic issues with the current site. DEC will provide probably a more detailed assessment on their concurrence that the town can seek lead agency status. So Charlie, I think on the one point, that 202B, we amended the PER to kind of include a map and plan, so I'll send that to you. You can kind of see what the map and plan basically is, a document that is required under 202B that establishes the maximum.
That's under the
amount to be
town law
financed.
for those of you that,
Yeah, I say 202B, that's basically town law. It establishes the maximum amount to be financed. The actual PER has a conceptual plan of finance as well, under different scenarios if the town did get a grant, if the town didn't get a grant, and ultimately looking at what the long-term debt service would be for the user. So that's it. I guess I'm here to answer any questions, or
you have an
I
extra
missed
one?
one, so
I'll take an
oh,
extra
yeah.
one if you got one.
so
Thank you. Nice colors.
I did change the font on this. If you're, so I had to upsize it. I had a tough time reading it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I put the colors look nice on the computer screen. They're kind of loud on paper.
Pete, I have a lot of questions, but
Okay.
I also don't want to just, I don't want to jump ahead if the other board members,
Well, this is pretty much just a time frame.
Right.
So this isn't really anything to do with the process or the project itself, just the time frame for all the submittals, correct?
Yeah, this basically gets the project to shovel-ready status. I mean, the next phase of this project would be, establishing a schedule for pre-design investigation, preliminary design submittals, that type of thing. So in the PER we developed, there is one of the last sections has a conceptual schedule for when, big picture-wise, design, submittals to agencies, ultimately, and basically going through, bidding, construction start, construction end.
During this process, will the people that were here a while ago come back before us will we be able to discuss numbers, anything about the project?
So as far as the cost of the project,
The cost of the project?
that
yes.
hasn't changed. I mean, so when we were here on June 24th, that was a $31 million, the actual number's like 30.9 and 8, or the overall project cost hasn't changed at all. Really, the next step would be the design process and when the town wants to commence with that. I know there's some aggressive timelines that have been kind of discussed internally, so I think that's really the next piece that
Well, I know we
have
want
to be.
to be aggressive to getting all the things done on time and everything, just,
So right now, this gets you to the point of, this is a September 15th, mid-September completion. being that EFC has not made any kind of announcement regarding the WIA grant application, I think this is a safe timeline to kind of get there. If it should happen that EFC announced, and we can certainly look at expediting some of the items here. I don't envision that happening, where they would come up with a grant and say all these things are due. So again, like the seeker, the final determination of significance, that a lot of times that happens in a night. The part 2 and 3 is discussed. The board makes a resolution to, regarding significance. That can all happen. This way, we've kind of got the ability to, we show due diligence, from EFC's standpoint and DEC's standpoint, the town has truly considered, had time to consider the potential impacts for the project.
This is probably too early to ask, but since we last had that meeting, things have changed a little bit, and the village has
I
decided to keep
understand that.
their own sewage treatment plant, do their own improvements. So from our perspective, there's going to be some rerouting of their, no?
No,
Nothing's going to change?
correct.
Okay, that was my question.
There's a common outfall. They need to work out with the DEC how they're going to treat the common outfall, basically, because it's a compliance point for the town.
Gotcha.
It's been basically a combined compliance point, so they will need to establish their own compliance point. And then, that may have impacts on how the town, basically monitors where the compliance point would be.
Right, I just want to make sure it's not going to have any impact on our plant, and if so, I was going to ask the next question, well, who's going to pay for that, but thanks for that.
I think on the compliance, if something needed to happen with what DEC required and how the
Right.
town, because the town currently monitors on a combined compliance point.
Correct.
So if they need to amend that based on the village's actions, then it probably is something where the town could ask for, compensation. That would be part of the village project to kind of
Right.
make sure that you have got 2 permittable and approvable compliance points.
Okay, thank you.
Last year when we talked about this, we were at the figure was around $20 million, 19 something.
Correct.
And now we're at 31. And at last Thursday's village board meeting, the question was asked or stated that we've jumped $10 million, and how that happened. Well, apparently, people in the public don't know that we've added something to the project other than the first segment of it, and that would be the drying system.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that net needs to get out there so that we know, and the benefits of the drying system, the cost of it, the reasoning behind it. We've listened to it, and it's all made really good sense to us. Whether we choose to spend that amount, I don't know yet. But from what the information that we've gathered, that particular system will pay for itself in a fairly short period of time, and possibly create enough revenue for us to offset the actual principal of the yearly bond.
Yeah, the whole driver is, and actually it's the sludge dryer. There's actually one of the other issues is the septic receiving. So there's a beefier septic receiving station too that would be positioned. It kind of makes the ability for local haulers to kind of come in and bring septic into it makes it easier for those haulers, makes it more attractive for them to utilize the operation. So it's a quicker operation, it's a cleaner operation. So those are the 2 big, because that septic system in and of itself is I think that was almost about a $1 million to $1.5 million ticket too, so.
Last year, what was our hauling fee? Do you know last year?
Hauling fee, I think it was close to 400.
400,000.
Yeah, I think it was north of 400. So,
Okay.
and to your point, Pete, on the septic receiving facility, right now it's done by the honor system. This would be all automated, computerized. It will have billing, all the bills that Denise has to send on a monthly basis, and it'll be accurate. How many gallons they put in, that's what they're going to be charged for. So,
One of the things we talked about was the receiving of the leachate. Our committee that did the town village thing, we had a speaker came in from Wayne County, I forget his name.
It's Marty.
Marty.
Yeah.
Marty
Adams.
Amen.
Amen, sorry.
Amon. And his comment to us was that as far as leachate, we might be a little bit late on that because they're already building one out there in Wayne County, and that's where the majority of the haulers are going to come from because they don't have
It's
sewers.
the market, so a lot of times with POTWs or treatment plants, leachate, you know, quite frankly, you're talking about two facilities. You're talking about Seneca Meadows and Ontario County landfill. I was just meeting with Seneca Meadows yesterday, and their projected leachate, I work in Seneca Falls, so we're familiar with their operation. They're projecting 100 million gallons a year of leachate in, you know, the very near future. So I mean, I think that what happens with those with landfills in general, you're going to see come March, April, May, the wet season, there's never enough outlets for it. So it comes down to economics, really.
Okay.
And for economics, it's treatment, which is what the town would see, and then the costs they'd have to pay to a hauler. So plants that are farther away, in order to kind of bring them revenue in, they may have to adjust that value. The pro forma we put together, I think the numbers that we had for leachate were reflective of, like, I think pre-2018 rates, and quite frankly, those were they were very dated rates. They were pretty low for treating raw leachate. So I think there's, you know, that even with low rates, I mean, you're kind of end up being in the market to some extent. They certainly are, you know, I think very competitive from what, you know, we see in other facilities can charge. So again, but it's hauling too. So
Yeah.
facilities like High Acres they're gonna use the county facility, they're gonna use the county treatment plant. You know, I don't see that changing anytime ever, really, that they'll always rely on Monroe County for their treatment. So yeah, it's a market. You're certainly competing with other facilities, but just because another facility is there that has it, it's well, a couple things. It's rates, as we talked about, also with throughput too. So if a hauler can come in and he can get in and out quickly, that's, you know, if you can grab another trip out a given day, that's the benefit there. So a lot of, you know, that has a lot to do with it as well.
Okay.
So I don't want to say crystal ball, but, you know, I think the way we've looked at this is that the town's now got time to kind of start, you know, between Art and Rick start reaching out and identifying where those markets are. So it's always, you know, you're bringing revenue in. Leachate, I think, is one where I don't see any facilities coming up with a system that is going to be that's going to meet their needs 100% of the time. So there's always going to be excess leachate, at least in those two facilities we're looking at.
Okay,
So
thank you.
you're up.
Well, I got to tell you something. I'm very glad that Paul Adams is here tonight, the town's finance director, and I'm very glad that Matt Chatfield's here tonight. Based on the position, Matt, that you have as the executive director of WIDA and your knowledge of grant applications and how you've educated me on certain things. And so my first question I'm going to ask is, I think that Pete, you're going to help in answering some of these. Art, I wouldn't be surprised if you are helpful in answering some of my questions, and I think Paul and Matt will be too. So my first question is, shovel ready. I know, Matt, that's something that you really get all excited about, shovel ready. And do you mind, so we can elaborate on what shovel ready means, what the opportunity is? And I'd like to make sure you got a microphone on you, because I just want to make sure I understand why we would go in the next 2 months through this timeline of events to become shovel ready.
Is this on?
I think it is
Yes?
on.
Okay. Well, I mean, from a economic development and land development perspective, shovel-ready would mean that the site has all of its environmental approvals and what we call entitlements, which would be approvals from both the local municipality and any other state agencies or federal agencies regarding permits. And then, of course, any title or due diligence work would also be accomplished so that the site would be essentially ready for some form of construction to take place. Now, Mr. Baker probably has a different definition from what he deals with, and I'll defer to him on the water wastewater aspect.
So again, yeah, that's this word, putting the project in position to apply for the WIA grant, which I didn't mention the PER too. So it's the PER, it's completion of the environmental reviews.
So it puts you
and
in
it's
a
the,
position to apply. for
So
the
we
grant.
would apply for the WIA grant. Ultimately, you're applying for a grant. So the town's been successful in the past, as we talked, I think, a little bit on on the prior meeting, June 24th, the demonstration that the EFC wants, the EFC's function is to provide money, grant funds to communities to make these developments. They don't want to give the money away if they don't think it's going to be used. So the town has a WIA grant. They've successfully used it. They've applied it really quickly. So that buys points with respect to EFC, and they're gonna support projects where grant money is being used, because that's their sole function. They don't want to give grant money away to communities that aren't gonna spend the money,
Right.
basically.
Okay, and then, and that's, I mean, I'm trying to figure out financially the pros and cons of getting to this shovel-ready thing. And Matt, I think one of the things you've told me that, especially today, in July of 2021, in the society we're in, with trillion-dollar infrastructure bills being discussed as I was coming over here on the radio and all that stuff, shovel-ready, and correct me if I'm wrong, additional monies that come available to the town of Webster for this project, over and above the WIA grant, would favor the shovel-ready project.
The term that is used more in the realm of economic development, or in as far as grants go, would be called project readiness, but it's very similar. In other words, how far along are you? Do you know what you need to know to advance the project, and are you ready to advance the project? Including not only from a physical or design perspective, but do you have, you know, your capital arrangements and your financing pretty much in order, and you're ready to move forward relatively quickly. So it's called project readiness, but it's a very similar concept in government work versus private development.
Okay, because like we just talked about at the beginning here, that there's a July 31st deadline for the New York State CFA grants. So we obviously are, if that's the same deadline every year, we wouldn't be in a position to apply for a New York State CFA, and maybe none of those agencies would even consider additional money beyond WIA, or is, do you follow where I'm coming from?
The agencies that are typically involved in the CFA process don't necessarily line up with the type of capital improvements you're considering for water and wastewater. The WIA grants tend to have their own schedule that does differ from the CFA prospects. So it's not, I wouldn't suggest that in next July, the CFA cycles typically opens in May, submissions are due in July. I don't foresee, based on the programs that are typically available within the CFA process, of a significant amount of money being available for wastewater improvements that you would wait to submit for next July. The program structure that Mr. Baker's talking about is likely going to be where you're going to get most of your money from, and it's on a separate schedule entirely.
So there is under the CFA, there's DEC has what's called the Water Quality Improvement Program Act. That does address wastewater programs. Typically, that's a co-funding opportunity that the town would have. We is really the main driver, the money available, and a lot of times DEC will target specific processes. So over the past probably 3 years, it's been facilities that don't have disinfection that are required to disinfect. The town has a disinfection process, so they've never been eligible for that. But there's always to apply for that after the fact. It's, that's an opportunity that would be explored, I think, next year at this time during the process, wherever state the project's in. But typically, you would want to apply for that after you've kind of gone through the main grant, the WIA process. So it's something that would be supplemented. We take a look at it to see where the DEC, it's a limited pool of money, and where the DEC's, pushing those funds in that particular year.
Paul, I think this one might be for you. All right. So you've got the nice, pretty color-coded thing here that Pete put together that culminates on September 16th, if we followed this. And on September 16th, if we followed this, and you admitted, very aggressive, all right? But if we followed this, we're doing a bond resolution, adopting a bond resolution on the 16th of September. A bond resolution of what? $31 million? $15 million?
Well,
And you might need to go up, sorry, Paul.
think it would be similar to the Phase 1 project where we adopted a resolution for the full amount of the project. But of course, we ended up borrowing quite a bit less because 25% of it was paid through a grant. So I think it doesn't hurt to pass a resolution for a higher amount than what you think you're going to actually bond. There's no rule against that.
And, okay, and this might be a Charlie question, is that, let's say that on this schedule, there'd be a public hearing, and people would come in and all that, and let's say we get, and we do a bond resolution for $31 million, for the logic that you just gave,
Right.
all right? Then a 30-day permissive referendum comes in on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Because at that point, we won't know if we have the WIA grant, right?
Right.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
not.
so you have to cover it.
If the program happens typically 3 months before you the grant submissions are made, and then you find out if you got one or not. So you would, depending upon what time, when the actual grant comes out and is announced, probably it's been about a 3-month window. It's going to be a very competitive year for this, just because the program didn't happen last year.
How much money does the town end up paying, if anything, with bond council and all that stuff to do a resolution for $31 million?
Just to do the resolution, I think it should be just a few thousand. We'd have Municipal Solutions, our bond consultant would be involved, and Harris Beach, our bond attorney.
Okay.
I would guess, 3,000 or 4,000.
And then, Charlie, is there any, per se, formal resolutions subsequent to bond resolution where the board is saying, okay, now we really mean it, we are going to borrow that money?
No, no, once we get through the resolutions prepared by Municipal Solutions and Bond Council, they have a certain set of procedures that they are going to do for us. And then once that happens, no.
Well, I might have asked the question wrong. So let's say the board tries, you know what, Paul's logic is correct, so we don't have to come back. We'll just go for the higher 31 million, but we really anticipate that we're only going to have to bond 20 million or less based on a lot of moving parts, WIA grants, other things that are happening. I hate to use your term, Matt. Generational opportunities are staring us in the face right now for grants. It's just a fact, right? But if the board all of a sudden said, this did not, middle of 2022, this did not pan out the way we thought, we're not going to move forward with this. Are we stuck because we did a bond resolution back in September?
Well, the bond resolution enables us to submit the bonds for public consumption, I guess you'd call it, or for purchase. I'm not sure, I guess I understand. I mean, once you put it out there, then you have a bond, and you have to deal with a bond.
So you mean that as soon as September 16th happens, the bond is issued? And
No. All that
Just gives us the
does
right.
is that authorizes the town to, if you want, to borrow money up to this amount. And the way we're bonding it, the way what a bond basically means is that you're going out to the market and you're selling the debt.
So now what I'm saying is that it's almost like we authorize 100 shares of common stock.
Correct. Yeah.
But it's still.
It's
same
somewhat
thing.
similar to that. Yeah.
When is the decision of actually borrowing the money where now,
Well, that's why you have an expert like Paul on board, because Paul will now, between him and Municipal Solutions, will go out and they'll look around for the best deal. The lowest amount of
I'm
interest.
not doing a
you're gonna
good
pay.
job asking the question.
Yeah,
Let's take phase one.
Yeah, it
You
was-
went and did a $12 million bond resolution at some
Yeah.
point, right? And then between when you did the bond resolution, you got shovel ready, and then you went and did the WIA grant, and you got it, it was $3 million, and all of a sudden you said, well, I gotta start when the contract, we go out to bid, all that stuff, where in the process that is outside of this timeline, it's after September, this
Yes.
timeline, when do we borrow the money?
23.
We
That's
borrow
a
the
year,
money.
Bill, I'm talking about an event. What,
Yeah,
when
we
do
borrow the money just
money?
prior to construction beginning. I think that's what we do with phase one, in anticipation of it, be, probably a few months before, so that we had the money. But you wouldn't borrow the whole amount, you would start with bond anticipation notes. You would just borrow what you think you're gonna need in the next year, and you gradually work your way up through the project. So it might be
Right.
borrowed over 3 or 4 years. Then at the end, you roll it all together into a serial bond.
Right,
So
we
there'd
just
be
did that.
1 year bond anticipation
Yeah.
notes rolling.
You're
through
asking,
the
Tom, I
project.
think, is there a time within which you have to absolutely
Well, I
ask
just
for
wanted to
money
make
or-
sure, I wanted to make sure, and if these are dumb questions, I apologize.
No,
but I
they're not
know it's
dumb.
not
They're
the-
good
the
questions.
Dumbest question is the one not answered,
Right.
asked. I wanted to make sure that we weren't all of a sudden on the, we had $31 million of debt on
No.
September
No,
17th.
no.
We're
It'd be
paying
years-
the interest
it'd
and
be
we got
years
no
from
money
now.
sitting
No.
on the bank. And so, and I assumed we didn't, but you know what happens when you assume.
Right.
Yep.
And now that makes sense, is that we just went through this process, we just perfected or whatever, the long-term debt
Correct.
on several projects over the last 5 years, but
Yes.
I think it was $11 million, but the majority of it was phase one.
Yes.
But it was the renovation of here. I got it, all
Okay.
right? So you would, even though the board has gone and said, hey, we're doing a resolution of bonding, indebting the town up to $31 million. There's still a lot of game left to make sure that that is a lot less than that. But the public could come in and say, wow, you're gonna bond, you're.
Certainly,
Okay.
yeah.
So in
Authorized,
conjunction
not
with
issued.
your question and your answer, I apologize for interrupting. Question to Art and Pete with respect to construction, because as you just noted, we're going to borrow for the different stages of construction. Am I understanding that correct?
Correct.
So there's an initial 10 million was for the leach, or
Flood
septic,
dryer.
receiving, and the drying system. Where does that fall within the construction of phase two?
Ideally, I think if I'm speaking, those are the two pieces you want to do first. Well, at least the sludge dryer. The main dryer for this project is the $400,000 to $500,000 that the town's currently spending on getting rid of the biosolids.
Thank you.
And ultimately, that contract expires next year. There's a big
Right.
unknown what's going to happen. So the sludge dryer could go in, and effectively it's essentially there just to kind of knock moisture out. So
Yeah.
that once that's operational, that's an instant decrease in what those costs are. So
Okay.
there's other things that need to be done, but that's from a pro forma cost standpoint. On my
No, you're absolutely right. I mean,
yeah,
that-
that's-
that's.
They would go first.
That
I would-
absolutely
my-
go first.
yeah.
That's what's gonna
I would
knock our
prefer
costs
that's
down.
where you're going to see the quickest
And that's gonna drive
payback.
us back into some more revenue to pay for the other stuff. And Pete had mentioned the septic receiving. That's a revenue source right there.
Right.
The quicker we can get that up and going, it'd be a nice facility.
Okay.
Well, and
But in tandem with that, John, I mean, obviously, there's other things going on in parallel as well.
Right.
But absolutely, those would be priorities.
in Barry, I think you articulated very well that, when there was a per estimate done a couple years ago on phase two, it was 19.7 million.
Yep.
And a couple of years go by because we've been doing phase one, and also there's been discussion of, well, maybe we should consolidate and all that. And last August, Labella and Barton and Judas presented in a public meeting and whatever, a Zoom meeting because it was COVID. The number was 19.7 million. Well, what has changed since then is that this hauling of sludge and all this stuff, and I know you and Rick went down to Pennsylvania and saw these drying mechanisms and all that, and voila, we're up to $31 million. Is it safe to say phase one at $12 million was essentially because you have aged out things over there, like the secondary clarifiers. They didn't even make the parts anymore for that, like, railway, whatever thing,
Yeah,
right?
And I can, let me jump in. So when was the first PR done? 2014, 2015?
2016. Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of time, sort of, it was touched up in 18?
19 was the official, so we did it in September 16. That was the mechanism to get the first, that was submitted along to get the first WIA grant.
Right.
Right.
Updated and for 2019 for the region,
Right.
including
And
the
that was
option.
driven because of the failures of
No,
the
I
secondary
got you,
clarifiers.
I got
Yeah.
you, okay? And
Yep.
I just want to make sure, so everybody knew that. It's like, hey, we got to do this. It's 12 million, but we need to go and replace those items that have aged out. The phase 2 of 19.7 million that was put together years ago was essentially the same concept of, we need to do this, we need to go in and get this aid stuff out. The additional 11 million that has come about is the I call it space aids technology and stuff, that then created page 37 and 38 on the PowerPoint presentation that you did for us on June 24th. And this page that is a big, beautiful Excel spreadsheet that makes me get all warm and fuzzy because I love numbers, right? Essentially what it's saying is that the additional bonding cost of that 11 million is about $560,000 a year. Ouch. However, it's saying that with the landfill disposal savings, the septage revenue, the leachate revenue, the HSOW and sludge revenue, the cake receiving revenue, that once you bring all that revenue in, not only does it cover the $559,000 of bond on that additional 11 million, but it creates a cash flow, a positive of $117,000 in year one, which technically you could go and use that positive to pay part of the rest of the bonding.
Sure.
Okay? Now, here's the thing, and this is where, and I think, during this process, I got to be honest with you. I want to audit this and rip this apart like it is my job and the board's job. If these are real numbers, it is going to be really a lot easier to go down this path, whether it's this fast, like in 2 months, or there's delays on it. But, Barry, day one on June 24th, you had questions about this leachate. And you brought up how Marty and all that stuff. Now, we talked about it a little more tonight. Tonight's not going to be the night, but I would, within this timeline, there will be some dedicated workshops and things to really nail down on this. I don't think anybody has any questions about the 19.7 million. Maybe they do. But it's basically the 12 million phase one, 19.7 is just the second half of that. To go replace stuff that's aged out. But this additional 11 million, which has somewhat become now politicized, I hate to say, and whatever, I think it's great. And if these numbers are correct, it's fiscally responsible. Actually, you could take the cash flows it gets here and you can move them right over to paying the remainder of the bond.
Yeah.
And you've heard me say, Matt, before, and it's somewhat, what do I want to say? If a project's going to cost $10 million, I need you to go out and get us $11 million in grants. It's an exaggeration to make a point. I think everybody knows, simple math. The more grants that we get on these projects, the less we have to bond and put the citizens into debt. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, there's also, when you sit there and say, wow, an extra $10 million, that's fiscally irresponsible. What if that $10 million investment, year one, pays for itself? Year one, that's not even a return on investment calculation. Usually a return on investment calculation is it takes 6.2 years to get your money back. Is that correct, Paul?
Correct.
But I want to go on record to say, and Pete, this isn't because I think that, I'm incredibly skeptical of this. I don't want to set any false expectations. And I really implore the board and the town attorney and our finance director and Matt and we need to dissect the living heck out of this thing.
Sure.
As we go down this path. And, because
Tom, there's a reason, let me jump in.
Please do.
There's an essence, so you're looking at it, and Pete and I have looked at this, Rick and I have looked at it, we've had Denise involved, Pete's team, we've looked at those numbers, those are conservative numbers. And I think a few of you know, I'm a conservative guy, Pete's a conservative guy, we've always come in on target, or well above. But let's look at the other side of it. If that dryer doesn't go in, what's the risk?
Oh, it's huge,
Huge risk.
huge.
Exactly. So we're looking at technology that's been around. It's second, third generation, and it's going to take the risk off the town, and it's going to drive some revenue to pay for that other side. So yes, we need to look at that. I definitely would agree to sit down and look at those numbers again. Maybe we missed something, but at that same point, let's look at the other side of it. What if that dryer doesn't go in? What if the dryer just breaks even? What if the dryer doesn't go in?
We already know what
we
we're,
went from-
we already know, just from the hauling
We know where we
alone.
are when we weren't 2 years ago to now. What
Right.
happens in another year or two?
We're risking the cost of hauling,
Absolutely.
Right.
which
And-
has doubled in the last couple of years.
And we've shown, we've shown landfills are closing. So I
Right.
think
Right.
in
Worst
that
case
evaluation.
scenario, we save $500,000 a year just in hauling issues.
Right,
Exactly,
That's the worst case scenario.
right.
that's what they call
What are you doing? You're supposed to help me out on this. You're supposed to pile on the skepticism with me. You're not supposed to back them.
I'm not saying we're gonna drive revenue, but
Right.
we're gonna save expense of
Yes.
$500,000 a year for that dryer, because we
And
don't have
that's-
to haul it anymore.
And that's the 500 we know today.
Right.
And then it
Right.
would come back to your traditional
Right.
return on investment, right? Then if we went really conservative, it's not cash flowing 100 grand year one, we'd have to reconnoiter these numbers and say, well, our bond cost for that is 560 a year, but we've saved 500,000.
So it's 60,000.
The 11, I don't know.
So
You
another
figure
component-
that out, return on investment.
Another component that Art had mentioned, I think that you had mentioned back in June, was that we, at some point, may have the ability to take sludge from other municipalities. Is that a possibility also?
That's correct, and Pete can jump in whenever, but that is, a little bit of that is factored in there. I think we talked about it last time. You know, this will give us a 1 to 2 year window of going out and talking to those communities
Right.
and, see what's out there and develop that customer relationship.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
within that spreadsheet, there's, behind that, it's not just one sheet, but there's support, and we've sent that to Art and Rick, I can gladly share it to the whole board, what, essentially what our pro forma. So behind that, we've got the assumptions. So here's the different categories. Here's the outside sludge, here's the outside sludge cake. So a facility that may not necessarily have an effective system, so they're still paying $125 a ton. If they sent it to Webster, Webster would essentially just reduce the volume and then charge them a fee that would have to be established on, so that's one component. It's leachate, it's the high-strength organic waste. So there's such a drive to push organics out of landfills now, so food waste, that's happening. I mean, think the
I
ability
think
to
it goes
receive some
into
of this stuff,
effect
so.
January 1st, 2022, right?
On institutional users, yeah, they have to divert from landfills. So whatever that means, so, an RIT, it's basically, the large organic facilities around here, just essentially the colleges, for the most part. But there's a bunch of categories in there, so we've got assumed volumes, assumed rates, and, each one of those, it's kind of a plug and play with the way it's set up. And you can
Right.
absolutely do this to say, what's that zero, what's my break-even point? I've got a $500,000 adder for the dryer. There's a cost to operate the dryer because it does use a lot of natural gas, but you're getting a reduced. I think the actual, the assumption we have built in here is the solids are still going to a landfill. So the reality is, they may not have to go to landfill anymore. They're going to be, we'll call what's Class A biosolids now. So they can be, there's other alternatives that are out there. They can take them to organics recycling facilities. So the landfill cost may go away, and that cost to get rid of it could be drastically decreased. Conservatively, we've assumed that it's continued landfill, and we've assumed, I think, probably relatively we've got an increase, an annual increase in landfill fees, but we think they're, it's 5% a year. The reality is landfill fees aren't going up 5% a year. They're going up a lot more than that.
Yeah, I
So
think we kept in probably $250,000, between 200,000 and 250,000. for
yeah,
landfill
there's still a
to start.
disposal
Right.
component
Because
into
that's
there. So
the conservative approach again, with the hope that we don't have to landfill anymore.
What is the, besides just losing 90 to 180 days, what is the risk of not following this schedule where we culminate on September 16th and we culminate in January or April?
well, I think right now the big unknown we have is we don't know when WEA is going to be announced. And typically when they announce, it's an aggressive schedule. So you typically have, it's hard to apply for WEA grant if you're not at least in the process of going through. So right now the town's has initiated seeker. We're under contract to initiate seeker. So that's really effectively almost a no cost to the town to kind of complete that process. The bond resolution really becomes that. So we don't know when WEA is coming out. So that's the risk. If you miss the deadline from WEA, then you're effectively waiting a year for the next round of grants. So really, again, when we call shovel ready, it's a little bit different term in wastewater, but it's really to kind of get you in the position so you can apply for the big, the grant, the largest grant that's out there currently.
When you say you don't know when EFC and WEA will become available, you're saying...
We're going off of history.
When we sit here right now, we don't know the time frame of when the, I'll call it portal of application opens up and when it closes for
Correct.
the next fiscal calendar year, whatever.
We're going off of history. It didn't happen last year. I mean, last year I think we were having the same conversations. One is WEA coming out. EFC was mum. So during all of 2020, they never announced. They did a limited CFA program last year. WEA never came out. We're expecting, given what Matt had talked about, there's so much money coming in as far as grant funding right now.
Yeah.
A lot of this will be tied to that, that infrastructure money that's always been there, and I think there's going to be even more. So we're basically proposing to put this project in a position that they can apply for a WEA grant, if and when I
got it, and I will tell you this, I hope the town board really, if I'm interpreting what you just said correctly, we can do all of the sequence of these things, and that public hearing and then the bond resolution, we could delay waiting on finding when EFC and WEA says something. And I'm saying that because I'm just going to call it what it is. There's a real busy autumn that's going on in 2021 with this town and this board when it comes to financial things.
Okay.
Is that a good way to put it? So, I'm just being realistic to the fact that I don't know if I want to have personally 3 or 4 things that are affecting the town finances going on at the same time. I don't know. The board hasn't really.
I don't think this is something that we're prepared to wait for. I don't think we can be waiting on this.
I think we've been shown
I think we
multiple
need to-
times that we can't wait on this sewer.
We need to do everything we need
sewage
to
treatment
do
plant.
to be ready to give this a go.
I think we also have to consider many of the items that we saw in our budget meeting yesterday that desperately need to be done at the plant, that should we move forward with Phase 2 will be incorporated into that.
Right.
Yep.
If we don't move forward with Phase 2, we're looking at incurring the costs of taking care of those items. And that's really foolish if we're going to think about Phase 2 in the next, put it off another year. Well, we've already fixed those things and spent that money here. It doesn't, I don't.
Yeah, I might have described it right. I'm not.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
We're looking at some big things, but I also feel that from listening to Pete, listening to Matt, we need to position ourselves to get the most funding possible for a project that we know needs to be done.
Yeah.
And if we're not ready, you know that there are many other communities that are vying for this same funding, and everyone is scrambling right now. So the more, it makes all of us a little nervous, but the more aggressive we are with that to position ourselves, I truly believe the better the result will be as far as funding.
And this next question, I think Art needs to be in the room, but maybe you can answer for him.
I'll
okay?
try.
Is that, okay, so very colorful, and I love the colors, I really do. And it culminates on September 16th. So what do you envision would happen then in October, November? Is this, we get with Dolly and we go out and put together bids for, 3 different contractors?
Oh, no,
or-
we're not, we haven't designed anything yet, so there's.
Okay.
there's- Yeah,
So
that's-
now, do
So
the
this
aggressive
project-
timeline, just like, this is an aggressive timeline from today to September 16th.
Mm-hmm.
Doable, I mean, you laid it all out how it would have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the next step after the bond on September 16th is now we sit around in a way waiting to see when EFC WIA opens up. And they didn't last year, but that's just, we've already said, Paul, we would go for the 31 million and they go, we think we're gonna get a quarter of that back. But we can't apply for it until they open that up. So that's the finance end. On the design end, then you guys go and design what?
So again, part of it is the process would be a kind of a tiered stepwise. So there's what's called a pre-design investigation. So we'd have to go in and do survey. There's some interior, there's a lot of interior work here on the digester buildings that would require a lot of just vetting and going through, essentially we call it a 3D survey. The survey, we have to do geotechnical investigation, so we have 4 structures. We've got this new septic facility, the dryer building, a new digester tank, and a couple smaller thickener tanks. They require soil borings, a geotechnical engineer to kind of go through, make recommendations for foundation design, so we can then move forward with design. So that's part of what's called the pre-design investigation. There's certainly, and then it's just developing what we call preliminary design. Preliminary design, we typically take to say the 50% of what we would call a final design. That preliminary design then gets submitted to the agencies. If EFC is funding the project, they would see it and they would do a technical review on it to make sure the money's being spent wisely. It would also go to DEC as well. So that gets you the preliminary design at that point. Then to kind of, you're waiting for those regulatory comments, and once you get those comments, you can kind of complete the final, go to final design. There's also any permitting requirements that would need to happen. So for this project, we think we probably need a, construction stormwater permit. We believe we'll need one. We're not entirely sure yet. That's not a heavy lift, but there's some regulatory permits. Based on how the project finally lands, we may need an air permit, or what's called a facility registration with the dryer itself. Those are kind of TBD issues that would be kind of vetted out during the design process.
Okay, and so I'd asked the question, what happens after September 26th? And Pete got into, pre-designs.
Initial design.
And so after that, when does it come to the point of putting out some type of,
So we have,
Bid or
in
whatever
the PER, I don't know, we have a schedule developed that's actually dated. We, right now, I think the goal is, and is to really, the way, what's that?
Is it April?
I think we'd be looking at essentially we'd be bidding process right now. We're hoping springtime.
Yeah.
But that's based on a schedule that that was feedback from, Art when he'd like to see it. It doesn't necessarily need to happen that way, but it's essentially, that's a hard push to kind of get through that. And there are points where you complete your work and you're waiting on regulators to kind of get back with things. But right now the hope is, or at least the way the project is shown, is spring bid. Construction-wise, probably a 2-year construction project. Depends on, how the design is set, how the specifications are written, so we could kind of provide some requirements for contractors on how quickly they would need to get certain pieces done. Normally, there's project schedules and liquidated, provisions for damages and that type of thing if they don't meet the requirements.
If all of the schedules were met, if everything went in line, bids were out and accepted and awarded, would it be possible to have that dryer in operation before the end of '22?
I don't think so.
Lead time on even ordering.
Yeah, so it certainly would be the first we'd structure it so it'd be the first thing, but it's a long lead item. The dryer itself is, I think, about a $3.5 million piece of capital equipment. So unfortunately, the one thing we're seeing is coming out of COVID. It's just the market, because there's a labor shortage on manufacturers.
So the answer is no.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. I
Okay,
mean, you do what you can to push, but there's a lot of stuff that's
Just
out of our
to-
control.
just-
So, yeah.
Yeah, I would hope for the spring of the
23.
following year, the worst case.
I thought, Barry, you were gonna ask, based on bids and all that in spring of 2022, when would that 2-year construction process start?
Well, once basically typically notice to proceed. So we would bid the project, typically a 30-day window to bid a project. There's a recommendation, so the town at some point after that, bids are received and we issue a recommendation award. There's a notice to proceed. That's usually when the clock starts for a contractor. They get a notice to proceed. At that point, they're moving forward with everything.
And I just heard, Bill, you think around August?
I think the earliest date he could possibly make would be August, first part of August.
Right,
More
August,
likely,
September.
the end of September.
Right, and this
First part
still
of
follows the schedule that was laid out in the PowerPoint in the PER.
And I think even depending on how the schedule goes and how the design process, you could always have a sequence process too, where you're putting a schedule on the dryer for, say, 1 year, but the overall project could be a 2-year. But that kind of puts the onus on getting the dryer done earlier in the process.
I'm all set.
Okay. That's why, I mean, earlier on,
I've been in the
yeah.
business a long time, so I have a fairly good feel for what this is gonna take. And it's not a 6-month project. There's no way.
No, Bill, I already said, I really was hoping you would be, helping me on that.
I looked at the numbers. The only questions I have on those are the actual, where they're gonna get the leachate and is it gonna come to us? That's the big unknown there. We're taking care of our own, that's saving us $500,000 a year in hauling fees.
Yeah.
That alone, to me, makes sense to put that part of the project in.
And the leachate of all these revenue things is the smallest.
And that was intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, you don't know. That's an unknown. You don't know
Sure.
you're gonna get it or not get it.
I mean, I think early on, I think Barry asked a question about, getting together again with the team that presented this, and I think if it's a workshop where we can bring that up on spreadsheet, or we can send you the spreadsheet and have at it, we can do it anytime. I mean, if you wanted Zoom, we can come in and do one of our sessions around there where we kind of dig into it. Yeah, I think that needs to happen, and ultimately that's what the board needs to accept, is getting comfortable with those numbers.
So now that you're waiting on some things, the next board meeting that you are planning on coming to is the 19th of August, about 4 weeks from now. I think that's 4 weeks.
Yep.
The seekers, all that. I mean, does the board, does anybody have any, after this, like, there's no way we're gonna stay to this time schedule that's on this, or are you like, we should try to stay to this time schedule?
I think you gotta try and stay to it.
You betcha.
I don't think there's an option not to stay with it. We have to.
Too many problems at the plant,
Okay.
and we can eliminate fixing a lot of stuff
Right.
if we can get this thing going.
Because there's a cost to waiting.
There is, and
Paul's
sort of
gone,
keep
isn't
this
he?
in mind, it's a horrible thing that if we replace some of the items that we talked about in the budget, and then in a year or two, they're probably gonna be ripped out when this project is done. So if we wait, if we replace that screw compactor,
Band-Aid until we can get the project done.
those are expensive Band-Aids.
Very.
Let's go.
Alrighty. Pete,
Yep.
Ready,
We'll be talking.
ready,
Matt,
set, hut
thanks.
1, hut 2.
Art? Huh?
I said, ready, set, hut 1, hut 2.
Yeah, right.
No, I really appreciate the timeline and all the work that's
Yeah.
gone into this, because it's very clear to all of us what the steps are, and I think that's,
Yeah, and I think once we have
Helpful.
a kind of direction on the next steps. That
Yeah.
timeline will turn into
Sure.
something to roll out here.
Barry's out of here in 6 months.
Yeah,
The design process is a lot more.
I heard that, Bill.
it'll be another wonderful Pete Baker Excel spreadsheet
Not for a while.
Pete, thanks.
that you do so
Art
well.
And Matt, and I,
Thanks, gentlemen.
No.
Paul must have had pickleball.
Yeah.
Well, I think this meeting is, oh,